The last pharaoh of Egypt was not Egyptian, she was Greek, and the empire she was about to lose had already survived 3,000 years. Egypt had outlived the pyramid builders, outlived the drought that killed the old kingdom, outlived the sea peoples who erased every other empire. Nothing on earth had lasted so long, and yet within one lifetime it would all be gone. Not burned, not conquered in some epic last battle, something quieter and honestly more humiliating. So how does the oldest empire in the world actually die? And how did its fate end up in the hands of a 21-year-old Greek woman negotiating with Rome for Egypt's life? That story is stranger than any legend about her. To understand her, rewind 3 centuries. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great marched into Egypt. And here is the twist. Nobody fought him. Egypt opened its gates and cheered. The Egyptians were exhausted from Persian occupation, and Alexander played his part perfectly. He sacrificed to their gods, and the priests crowned him Pharaoh, a Greek wearing the double crown. Remember that image. 9 years later, Alexander was dead at 32, and his generals carved up the world like a carcass. A general named Ptolemy grabbed the richest piece of all, Egypt. Ptolemy did something clever. To Greeks, he was a Greek king. To Egyptians, he was carved on temple walls as a proper pharaoh, making offerings to the old gods. 1 man, 2 costumes. His family would wear them for the next 3 centuries. That is how Greeks became pharaohs, and their capital became the greatest city on earth. Alexandria, home to the lighthouse, one of the wonders of the world, and to the library that tried to collect every book ever written. But Alexandria had a secret. It was a Greek island floating on an Egyptian sea. Greeks held the palaces and the offices. Egyptians farmed the land and paid the taxes. 2 worlds, 1 country, 3 centuries of quiet resentment, and the dynasty itself. To keep the bloodline pure like the old pharaohs, the Ptolemies married their own brothers and sisters. Generation after generation, the result was exactly what you would expect. Kings grew weaker, feuds grew bloodier. Meanwhile, across the sea, a small Italian republic was eating the world. Carthage gone, Greece swallowed, Syria absorbed. Rome did not always conquer with armies, sometimes it just moved in. By Cleopatra's childhood, Egypt was independent on paper only. Roman senators loaned money to Egyptian kings and owned them, and Rome had discovered something dangerous. Egypt's grain could feed the entire city of Rome. The empire was hungry, and Egypt was food. Cleopatra's own father kept his throne by paying Rome bribes so enormous he had to borrow from Roman bankers to pay Roman politicians. The Pharaoh of Egypt, wearing the double crown of the gods, was a debtor on his knees. Into that dying house, in 69 BC, a girl was born. Cleopatra. Forget the Hollywood seductress. The real one grew up in the greatest library on earth, and she was preparing for a war her whole life. Ancient writers say she spoke perhaps 9 languages. She studied medicine, mathematics, diplomacy, and she did the one thing no Ptolemy had bothered to do in 300 years. She learned Egyptian. Think about what that means. For the first time in 3 centuries, a ruler of Egypt could speak to Egyptians. She sailed the Nile, honored the old gods, appeared as the goddess Isis. The occupier's daughter became more Egyptian than her entire dynasty. So who was she really? A political weapon built in a library? She would need it. At 18, she inherited the throne, shackled to it. Egyptian custom forced her to co-rule with her brother, who was 10 years old. The boy's advisors wanted a puppet, not a partner. Within 3 years, they drove Cleopatra out of Alexandria. At 21, the Queen of Egypt was a fugitive in the desert, raising an army to take back her own throne. And right then, fate dealt her a card. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, landed in Alexandria chasing a rival. Both siblings understood instantly. Whoever won Caesar won Egypt. Her brother controlled the palace, the army, the city. Cleopatra controlled nothing. What happened next became legend. The story says she had herself smuggled through enemy lines, rolled inside a bedding sack, and unrolled at Caesar's feet. Ancient gossip? Maybe. But somehow a hunted queen crossed a hostile city and reached the one man who mattered. Caesar chose her. The palace exploded into war. In the fighting, fire from the docks spread into the city, and part of the great library burned. When the smoke cleared, the boy king was dead in the Nile, and Cleopatra ruled Egypt. By the way, that famous story that Caesar burned down the library of Alexandria. Another myth. The fire took part of the collection. The real death of the library came later, slowly, from something worse than fire. Neglect, remember that. It is how this whole story ends. She bore Caesar a son, Caesarion, Little Caesar. For a moment, the math looked beautiful. Her dynasty's future fused with Rome's most powerful man. Egypt was safe. Then, on the Ides of March, Rome's daggers came out. Caesar was assassinated on the Senate floor. Cleopatra was in Rome when it happened, staying in his villa. She grabbed her son and ran home. Her protector was gone, and Rome collapsed into civil war over his corpse. From the wreckage rose two men: Octavian, Caesar's cold teenage heir, and Mark Antony, his greatest general, who took the east. When Antony summoned Cleopatra, she arrived on a golden barge with purple sails, dressed as the goddess of love. It was not romance. It was the best staged diplomatic entrance in history. It worked. Antony needed Egypt's money and grain for his wars. Cleopatra needed Rome's sword. They became allies, lovers, and eventually something like a royal couple, with 3 children. For a decade, the East was theirs. Then they went too far. In 34 BC, on a golden stage in Alexandria, Antony distributed Rome's eastern lands to Cleopatra and her children, and he declared Caesarion, her son by Caesar, the true heir of Julius Caesar. In Rome, one man read that as a declaration of war. Octavian was a propaganda genius. He did not declare war on Antony. That would be civil war. He declared war on her, the foreign queen, the Eastern witch who had enslaved a good Roman with sorcery. Sound familiar? The oldest trick is blaming the outsider. Then Octavian crossed every line. Antony's private will was held by Rome's sacred virgins, untouchable by law. Octavian seized it anyway and read it to the Senate. In it, Antony asked to be buried not in Rome, but in Alexandria, beside Cleopatra. Rome exploded. The war was sold. The World War came at sea, September 2nd, 31 BC. Actium off the coast of Greece. On one side, Octavian's lean, disciplined fleet. On the other, Antony and Cleopatra's armada, heavy with the treasury of Egypt aboard the queen's own ships. The battle turned into a grinding slaughter, and then, in the chaos, Cleopatra's squadron raised sails and punched through the line, carrying the war chest away. Antony saw her go and left his own fleet to follow her. His army watched their commander vanish. Within days, they surrendered without him. Was it treason, panic, a pre-agreed plan to save the treasury? Historians still argue it did not matter. Actium broke them. The lovers fled to Alexandria and waited a year for Octavian to come collect the world's richest prize. When the legions reached Alexandria in 30 BC, Antony's last troops deserted at dawn. Told falsely that Cleopatra was already dead, he drove his sword into himself. He died in her arms in the fortified tomb where she had barricaded herself with her treasure. Now watch her final move, because it explains everything. Alone, defeated, guarded day and night, Cleopatra negotiated with Octavian for weeks. Not for her life, for her children's right to inherit Egypt. The last pharaoh was still trying to save the dynasty. Octavian's answer leaked through a sympathetic officer. There would be no deal. She would be dragged through Rome in chains, the star exhibit of his victory parade. Her children's fate unspoken. She understood perfectly. On August 10th, 30 BC, she dressed in her full royal regalia, shared a last meal, and was found dead on a golden couch, her 2 handmaidens dying beside her. The famous cobra, maybe. Poison, probably. Rome never got its parade. The last pharaoh of Egypt exited on her own terms. One loose end remained. Caesarion, 17 years old, son of Julius Caesar, last king of the dynasty. Octavian's advisor summed it up in 5 words. Too many Caesars is bad. The boy was hunted down and killed. The house of Ptolemy was extinct. Almost extinct. One child slipped through history's fingers. Cleopatra Selene, the queen's daughter, was paraded in Rome in golden chains, then married off to a client king in North Africa. There she ruled for decades, stamped her mother's face on coins, and kept a ghost of Egypt alive at her court. And Cleopatra herself. Octavian allowed her to be buried with Antony, as she asked. Then history lost the address. Her tomb has never been found. It may lie under the streets of modern Alexandria, or beneath the sea that swallowed her palace district. The last pharaoh is still missing. And Egypt? No great sack, no burning temples. The farmers went to the fields as always. The Nile rose as always. Only the flags changed. Which brings us back to our question, how does the world's oldest empire actually die? Here is the answer, and it is colder than any battle. Octavian did not make Egypt a Roman province like the others. He made it his personal property. The pharaoh's kingdom became the private farm of one Roman, feeding Rome's mob with its grain. 3,000 years of civilization demoted to an asset. Rome's own senators were forbidden from even entering Egypt without the emperor's personal permission. Why? Because whoever controlled Egypt's grain could starve Rome into surrender. The oldest empire on earth ended as another man's pantry, too valuable to be trusted to anyone. And this is where the real death begins, because empires die twice, once when they lose power, and once when they lose memory. Under Rome, the temples slowly emptied. The priests died without successors, and with them died the one thing holding it all together, the writing. The last dated hieroglyphic inscription ever carved was cut in 394 AD on the island of Philae. After that, silence. Within a few generations, not one human being on Earth could read the words on the pyramid's walls. 3,000 years of voices, sealed. Egypt stayed mute for 14 centuries. Until a French scholar named Champollion, armed with a broken slab called the Rosetta Stone, cracked the code in 1822. The day he read the first pharaoh's name aloud, a dead civilization started speaking again. One last piece of vertigo from where this series began. The pyramids were more ancient to Cleopatra than Cleopatra is to us. She was not the heir of old Egypt. She was its last tourist, ruling from a Greek city, dreaming in a borrowed crown. And she knew it. Every civilization believes it is the permanent one. Egypt believed it for 3,000 years, longer than anyone before or since. It survived droughts, invasions, and apocalypses. And it still ended, sold off quietly, one harvest at a time. Permanence is a story we tell ourselves between collapses. As for Rome, the empire that swallowed Egypt, it grew until the whole sea was a Roman lake. Eternal, they called it. The eternal city. You already know how this pattern goes. Rome's own 3 deaths were already being written, and one of them came from a direction no legion could defend. That story is coming. Subscribe so you do not miss how the empire that buried Egypt dug its own grave.